And we're good. Okay, so hello everybody. Welcome back. And we have a special guest with us, Stacy Lee, who's going to talk to us about negotiating salary, among other things. And so, Stacy, can you just take a moment and introduce yourself to the class?
Sure thing. So thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure. My name is Stacy, and I'm the Assistant Director of Student Professional Development at the Joyce K. Salzberg Center. I believe my colleague Patrick is also or has also come to speak with you all. So I work with Patrick and Carissa, and we're kind of like the career center within CLA, as you know. So if you ever need help with resumes, cover letters, interview, any of this stuff, you're always welcome to meet with us and make an appointment on Handshake.
Very good. And I did give you capability. If you want to share your screen, you can start that now while I just fill in time. Um, but when I first met you and when I first learned that the professional development office offered this, I got excited because this is something that I didn't even know existed. And I wish I knew from the many jobs I've had in my lifetime. I never knew how to negotiate salary, and I basically took whatever they offered. 'Cause I was
Mhm.
just so grateful to get a job early in my career. And that later, I just never really knew or felt empowered or I had the skills to do it. So what I learned about you guys offering it, I definitely wanted to get it in front of my students because I want them to have this very important skill under their belt when they get out there and start looking for their career jobs. So thank you again for coming and sharing this with us.
Yeah, no problem. I feel the same way. When I was first starting, I feel like I knew maybe on paper that I should have negotiated or that that was something I should do, but the process was not really clear. So hopefully by the end of the session, everyone will have a good sense of how this might look and some of the strategies that you can use when approaching a negotiation conversation. Also, I know it says budgeting on here, but we're not really going to get into that because the presentation is kind of combined. So the first half is just salary negotiation. As we discussed too, if you have questions, feel free to interrupt or let me know at any time. But when you receive the job offer, this is of course a great moment. You want to take a second to celebrate and just really enjoy that moment. But you don't just want to automatically or some of us just fall into this by mistake, right? Like you get the offer and you're so excited, you're on the phone maybe, and you just say, I accept, thank you so much, right? That temptation is definitely there, but you don't want to do that. Instead, you want to get it in writing because typically when the job is offered, it will be over the phone or, maybe through a Zoom call nowadays. So you want to make sure that you have all of the details in writing because otherwise it is not official. It is just a spoken offer. And, unfortunately, things can happen where if it's a spoken offer, it's not official. So things can change, right? So we want to make sure we get that in writing. And then that also helps us with our negotiation because we're very clear on what the numbers are, what the benefits are, how many hours you should be working, what the schedule is like, etc. So getting that in writing, I would say, is the first step. And now I want folks, and maybe there are a few things that come to mind when it comes to your biggest challenge, because I think for most of us, this is not something to that comes very automatically, right? Like it takes some learning and some practice for sure. But Katrisa, can you tell me if there are any things that you think students might be thinking right now in terms of the challenge?
I can tell you what I thought was a big challenge, and also what I've heard from other students when we've done this before. I think one of the biggest things, like I said before, is you're just so grateful just to have a job, and you don't want to feel like you're not being appreciative, that you're asking for more, like that what they've offered you isn't enough. I want more. So sometimes people feel like they're being greedy or being disrespectful by asking more and not just accepting what they get. And I think as a woman, a
Hmm.
lot of times for women, we're kind of conditioned not to ask for more. Like we're kind of conditioned to accept whatever and just take it. And so to speak up and feel empowered to speak up to ask for more, I think is a big thing for women. in particular, but for many people, and people of color. And I know there are a lot of disparities about the wage gap for people of color. And I think part of it is understanding our worth and then feeling empowered again to speak up and ask for it, instead of just being grateful that they even offered us something.
Mhm. Yes, 100%. I think there are a lot of things, like not just the maybe lack of experience that people have with this, but then also those societal factors and societal influences that can make us feel sometimes that this isn't appropriate, or you should just sort of be low key about it. And the other side of that too, I will add, is maybe just not being sure how much to ask for. Like, how much is okay and how much is too much, because there is a point where it gets to be too much. So that's definitely something that we'll talk about today as well.
You're right. I didn't say that, but I think that's probably one of the biggest things. Even when you see sometimes on applying online, and it'll say like, what are your salary requirements, and what do I put there? You don't want to sound greedy again and ask for, "Well, I want $1 million," but you also don't want to lowball yourself and say, I'll just take 20,000 and be grateful. Thank you so much. So yeah, understanding and knowing what is that right number, is a big deal.
Hmm. Yep, for sure. All right. So before we kind of break down this process, I think there are some ideas, some mindsets, and we've already kind of talked about this, but just to provide even more context as to why it's important to negotiate, I think somewhat intuitively, you can get more money, you can get more benefits, right? You can advocate for your needs. But these are some other facts that may not be well known, that I think are good to know. So the first thing is that failing to negotiate it negatively harms your lifelong earning potential. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes when we're looking at our growth over the course of the years, so not just in that job you're accepting now, but maybe 5, 10 years down the line, promotions, raises, things like that are typically done as a percentage of your current salary. So when you apply how that compounds, maybe it's 12%, 15% that you're getting when you get that raise. If you start out with a bigger number, then obviously you're going to be getting more over time. So this can help explain why sometimes there are two people who are doing the same job or similar jobs, and they make wildly different amounts, even within the same company, because one person, they have seen that growth accumulate over time, because they started out more. So that's the first thing. One thing I'll just say to that quickly too is, it's not to say that if you didn't negotiate, you're doomed or something. Like, you can always go to another organization, another company, and sort of start fresh. And that's how people can quickly increase their income as well. So just putting that out there. The second point is that the majority of hiring managers, around 70%, according to a survey of different companies and different organizations who hire a lot of folks, they expect you to negotiate here in the United States, at least. I can't speak to other countries, other contexts, because it might be a little different, but here in the US, the majority expect you to. And with that, if anything, it could be a little bit it not strange, but it definitely reflects well on you to negotiate. I'll just say that. If you don't negotiate, then I think some hiring managers, they understand, okay, this person is new, maybe they don't really know that this is an option, or it could be viewed as a hesitancy to stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself. So just wanting to normalize that for you all here. And then the last thing, which we will go into more detail on, but remembering that salary is not the only thing. So there are a variety of benefits that you can negotiate on. I think nowadays, especially things like being able to work remotely or working on a hybrid basis, right? That is very, very common nowadays. So you can ask for things that were not really common practice and not really seen 5, 10 years ago. So just keeping that in mind, if they can't budge on the salary, you can ask for other things as well. All right, so setting up the conversation, you have this offer in hand, you're feeling good. What do you do next? If you are offered the job over the phone, I would recommend that folks basically say, thank you, I really appreciate this. And can I please have the offer in writing, could you please email that to me? And then can I call you back in 48 hours or 72 hours, right? You want to give yourself some time to look over that information, that job offer, and sort of put together your case by doing the research and preparing in the ways we'll discuss today. If you maybe you're super on it and you had already done all of that information before they gave you the offer. So if that's the case, then you could just start negotiating over the phone right then and there. But I think for most people, it makes a little bit of sense to give yourself that cushion and that time to really dig into it and feel confident. If you're offered the job over email, which sometimes will happen, I would recommend that you request to get on the phone or get on the Zoom call, whatever it is, to discuss the offer in further detail. Or you can say, I have some questions about the offer, and I would love if we could schedule a Zoom call sometime this week. Would that work for you? You don't necessarily want to say, I want to negotiate, right? Can we schedule a call? Because that might sound a little bit awkward, but basically you want to get them on the phone or on the Zoom. And it's really not ideal to negotiate over email because it's slow. A lot of information can be lost in translation, in the writing, and it's just not ideal. So some people, some students have told me that they've done it over email in the past, but I think by and large, it's better to avoid that.
Can I just also ask, because the person who calls you and tells you you have the job or offers you the job, they may not be the one who had the power as far as any kind of negotiation, right?
Mhm.
So so even trying to negotiate, you may not, they can tell you a lot of things, but they may not even have the ability to actually make those things happen.
Exactly. I'm so glad you mentioned that because the person that you are negotiating with typically is going to be the person who works in HR or human resources. So if the person who calls you is your boss, let's say your future boss, your future manager, they might be saying congrats, we loved your interview, but you can't actually negotiate with that person. So you're right, you would be negotiating with HR. Alrighty, so when thinking about the negotiation, I think these are the 4 steps that you want to kind of think about and prepare for. The first step is just knowing your value. This is surprisingly important, and this is something that you do again and again throughout the entire job search process, from the time you're first putting together your resume to the interview to this now here. So it's basically the same thing, the same basic principles. And then we'll get into the research, knowing your target salary, knowing your benefits, your strategy, and then, of course, practicing. Because, like with any of these things, you don't just want to go in cold. You don't just want to go in and have this be your first time doing that job interview scenario or that your first time negotiating. So, finding someone to practice with is really, really important. When it comes to knowing your value, this, as I said, it goes back to your resume. It goes back to those achievements and those skills that got you the job in the first place. So that's really important to remember. Earlier, we talked about how sometimes there's this fear of seeming greedy or seeming like, I don't know, like you're asking for too much and maybe they'll take this offer away or something. Maybe there's some fear around that. So it's important to remember that they picked you for a reason and you need to revisit those reasons and be comfortable expressing them. Again, you've probably done this in your interview. So go back to your resume, write down maybe 3 or 5 of your top relevant accomplishments from your past that made you qualify for this job, and have those at the ready. When thinking about the prep too with this, you want to remember that you are your own brand, and your brand is basically your reputation, your achievements. And going back to that thing about how most employers, they expect you to negotiate as many as 70%. With that being said, the employer is going to be looking out for the employer, right? Even if they have maybe set aside some money or are prepared to pay you a little more, they're going to offer you a little bit less upfront because if they can get you for less, that's a win for them, right? So no one else is going to do this for you. No one else is going to say, hey, by the way, we could have given you 5K more, but you didn't ask, so we're just going to give it to you. That's not really what happens. So you just have to remember that this is your job and you can do it, right? This is something that I think anyone can do, especially people always ask, can I do this at my first job, at my entry level job out of college? And the answer is almost always yes. Occasionally there are cases where maybe if it's like a limited term position, or there's a stipend or something that's like federally funded, maybe then that you can't really negotiate on that, you know, amount, but that then you go into benefits and other things. So my point is, you can do it. You are your own brand, and you are very, very capable.
Can I just add, just because two things you said really stuck out to me. The part about, I think another fear, and you just mentioned it for students, is, you know, if I push back, if I ask, if I negotiate, I may lose this job, I may lose this opportunity. But as you said, like, they went through this process and they whittled it down to you. So they're not going to be offended and say, all right, screw it, let's start all over and find somebody else. They're not going to go through that unless things go terribly, terribly wrong, which is not going to happen because everyone's watched this video. But I think that's a real fear for students also, is that somehow this opportunity is going to go away if they ask, or they ask for too much. So
Mhm.
I'm glad you said that. And also, I think on the other point of, sometimes again, I think with law enforcement, they are very, I don't know what the right word is for it, but they're very slot oriented as far as salary. So you may not have that much wiggle room, specifically in law enforcement, to negotiate your salary. But again, there are other things that you can negotiate that we'll talk about as well.
Mhm. Yep, exactly. I think amen to both of those things. And I see that in some other fields, like you know, in certain jobs, there's like a tier. I know for teaching, for example, there's it's very clear. Like you're a first year, you get this much. Second year, you get this much. So in certain cases, if you ask and they say we can't do that because reasons, that's okay. You asked and you tried your best, and now I think you basically can rest easy knowing that you did what you had to do and you're not leaving money on the table. So either way, it's a win-win. All right. So when it comes to articulating your value in the negotiation, again, looking very, very similar to that job interview, to some of those ways that you would present yourself when answering questions there. So when thinking about your relevant accomplishments, you know, you want to think about those achievements, the skills, and then perhaps most importantly, the results that you were able to bring. So for example, if you're applying for a full-time role at a company, and maybe it's doing, it has something to do with finance, right? And maybe you didn't have the exact experience doing that thing when you were a college student here at Temple, but you did an internship and there were some administrative duties involved in your internship. Like you had to help with filing and you were in charge of supporting, maybe you were interning at a police office or something. You were in charge of like supporting the officers in various tasks and making sure that, you know, certain checks were done and things like that. So thinking about those transferable skills as always, and how you were able to contribute whatever that environment was, and sort of practicing this to yourself over and over and over again, so that it becomes comfortable. Because most of us, again, are not very, very comfortable talking about our achievements, and it can feel a little bit unnatural at first. So just sort of having these value statements ready, I think, can be really helpful when thinking about the negotiation. At the end, I'll also show some examples of how this might look in an actual conversation, so you can see how it would be sort of woven in there. All right, so once you've thought about your value, your brand as it relates to this job, you now want to do the research, and this is where people often have a lot of questions and can get stuck. So how to know your target salary and your benefits. So these are the 6 steps to benchmarking your salary and your benefits. You want to first research and identify a comparable job title or maybe the same job title. You want to find the salary range for that and establish your target salary. I'll show you some resources and some really great websites to do that with. And then you use that to identify your target salary range. Ideally, it's a range and not just a fixed number. After that, or maybe well before that, ideally, you want to create a realistic budget, because when thinking about the salary, it's not just what the data and the information tells you, but it's also about what your needs are as a person and as a professional. You know, what makes sense for you and your lifestyle and your needs. You also want to, number 5 here, determine your resistance point. And this is basically the point at which you basically have to walk away from the negotiation because you can't make it work with that little amount of money. And this doesn't happen all the time. You know, I've seen it happen occasionally. It's not very often that the employer will pay someone so little that, you know, you can't make it work with your budget and so on. But if it does happen, I think it's very important to not just accept it out of some fear, you know, feeling of obligation, because there are so many jobs out there. You definitely can find something else. You know, it's not the end of the road. And at the end of the day, you don't want to be working for an employer that is undervaluing you that severely, right? So again, I know everyone's situation is different. Maybe things are tight and you just got to have something for now until you can get to something better. But ideally, you want to identify that point where you realize this is not working for you and your budget. Last but definitely not least, you want to assess the value of benefits. A whole slide on that. So just stay tuned because there's much more to be said. All right, so when it comes to researching the salary with your job title or similar job titles, these are some places that you can use. Payscale.com and salary.com are both really good. I personally really like salary.com just because it has, I think, the most variety of jobs and the information is fairly standardized. It's pulled from some of these other places, like the Department of Labor, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. These are good places to look in and of themselves, I think, too. LinkedIn, similar to LinkedIn, places like Glassdoor might have insight. These tend to be more self-reported, so maybe take them with a grain of salt, but you know, people will share their salaries on there. Different business publications or other publications specific to your field, really good to check out. The local Chamber of Commerce, for us, it's Philadelphia. You can see if they have salary data that's more recent and available. And then, you know, different industry compensation surveys, you can do a quick Google or look in the database and see if there's something related to your job. But no matter what you decide to do, make sure that you input your city/region that you're going to be working in, as well as your years of experience, as this will impact the range. But I would say typically the city or the state, you know, region is more important because the same job in Philly is going to pay very, very, very different from a job in New York City or LA, right? A city with a much higher cost of living. And comparably, if you're working in Nebraska, let's say, then it might be a much lower compared to Philly. So just keep that in mind. It's not like a one size fits all situation here. All right, so this is how that might look. When you go to salary.com, you're going to see the screen. So all you have to do is input that job title and your location, and then you will find the position. So this is just an example, but we have the title, PR Specialist 1, Public Relations Specialist, and then you also have some alternate titles that mean the same thing. And then you have the requirements and responsibilities. So just read that through to make sure that it is accurate or it is the same job that you're looking at, that you're reviewing here. And then you use the information on this page to set your target salary and your range. So when you scroll down on any of these job pages, in salary.com at least, you're going to see a bell curve that looks pretty similar to this. And on here, you'll see the 25th, the 75th, and then the median for each of these positions. And what I think is important to keep in mind is that you are not an average middle of the road kind of employee, right? You are an above average employee. You're killing it. You're doing great. That's why you were hired, right? So in my opinion, and people have different takes on this, but in my opinion, you should be earning the median salary for that position, given your experience and your location, right? So if the offer that you receive is not up to that number, in this case, for the 49 number, then there's your case right there. Like, this is the standard rate for this job, and so you deserve that, right? Like, you can kind of present it to the employer in that way. If you were offered more, so in this case, let's say you were offered 52, 53, does that mean you can't negotiate? No, you can still ask for more. You can still, I would say you can comfortably ask for around the 75 number. The 75 number is not meant to be a ceiling, but it's kind of like a guidepost that you can use as a reference. So I have some information on this next slide here. You want to establish your range by starting with your target salary and stretching upward. So the reason for that is because typically when you're talking to the HR person, they're not going to just immediately say yes to the number that you give out. They're going to try to work you down, right? If you, going back to this example here, if you say, I want 60 and you were offered 40 or sorry, 52 or 53, they're likely not going to say, yeah, sure, 60 sounds great. They're going to try to say, okay, I don't know about that, but can we do 56 or something? This is again just an example, but to give you all a sense of what typically happens. So you don't want to just give them your target salary number. You want to stretch up maybe a few grand. So the size of the range can be between maybe 5 and 8K, $5,000 and $8,000. I think is a pretty safe bet. And then of course you want to think about that resistance point, that point where unfortunately you're not being paid enough, quite simply, and you just have to turn down the offer, which again is something that happens all the time. It's it's nothing wrong with you or with them. It's just the situation didn't work out. So think about that as well, where if it was this low or any lower, you just couldn't make it work for your situation. And then I think that's all that I have on that. And before I go into taxes or anything, Katrisa, is there anything that you maybe in the mind of a student or just in your mind that you have questions on or want to add to this with?
So I guess just to restate it, just to make sure I'm clear about what you're saying. So if I wanted my target is 60,000, I want to be at 60,000. What I should say in the negotiation is I would be comfortable with 68, something like that. And then because they're going to come in lower and see if we can work our way back to the 60. But if I came in saying, well, I want 60, they're going to start lower and I'm going to end up taking less than what I've wanted. Is that's kind of what you're saying through that?
Exactly. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And I think one thing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead.
I remember in one of the classes when we talked about this, a student was saying, well, can you ask other, what are they paying other people? Can you ask those types of questions? And I think that was something that's kind of frowned upon about asking a potential employer, like about other people's salaries and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say so. As a prospective employee, you're still a little bit on the outside. So when you get in there, maybe it's a different story and people are willing to share that information. But yes, I would say it would probably be better to just do this research. Going on a website like Glassdoor or LinkedIn is basically a way of getting that information without having to actually ask them.
Okay.
Yep. And for something like this, the only thing that I would add is sometimes when you hover over this chart here, it will show you what the additional percentiles are. So if you're here, maybe it'll show you like 80, 85, right? And then it gets higher and higher. So going back to that topic about what's realistic, is a million too much? It probably is, right? You want to look at this chart and kind of put yourself in a reasonable place. You don't want to just zoom right up and say like, oh, what's the top 1% of people in this role making, because that might be a little bit too high. So that's why I kind of highlight the 75 number as something to aim for. And if the initial offer is that or above, it's like, great, you're being compensated very fairly and you can rest easy knowing that. But yeah, what you said before about how you want to start with the higher number than your goal, that's like perfect.
And I think what you said also about the resistance point is so important too. A lot of times, I won't say a lot, but sometimes students, they're very passionate about something and they want to work in an area like a nonprofit or something like that, and the pay is very low. But they're so passionate about this issue and they want to help. And sometimes they may find themselves not really thinking about the realities of life, about, you're going to talk about taxes, about that, about student loan debt and all those things. And so they accept a salary because they're passionate about this issue. And they find themselves really struggling because they really haven't thought about what is it going to cost to actually live on this salary. So you do want to think about the resistance point, like this is really just too less of a salary for me, and I can't actually live on this and maintain my sanity. And I do say sometimes for students, if you're really passionate about something, maybe you can't work in that area because it just doesn't pay, but you can always volunteer and still get that fulfillment, but maybe you have to work somewhere else and sustain yourself and have a quality of life that you can really enjoy.
Mhm. Yep, 100%. Unfortunately, it's very sad when I see people, not just students, but also people who are more advanced in their careers and they're doing something because they love it, but eventually you get burned out and you feel like you're being taken advantage of in a way, which no one wants to feel that way. So thinking about it on the front end can help prevent some of those problems down the line. All right, so taxes. When we're looking at this number, many of you probably already know this because you might work part-time on Temple's campus or at another job or something, but you do not take that whole number home. You want to make sure that you factor in about 25% for gross of your gross income for taxes. But if you want to get a better sense of that number instead of just a rough estimate, I highly recommend using this tool Smart Asset, because you can put in your location, so in this case, Philadelphia, and you can see what your estimated monthly take home pay is, and it'll be pretty close. I mean, if your job is taking other things out of your paycheck, like health insurance, life insurance, things like that, the number will be different. But by and large, I think this is pretty good because you can see the state, local, federal taxes, all of that. Um, so once you do that, you'll have a clearer sense of what your actual net pay is, and then you can use that to make your budget and kind of see how things will play out for you. My possibly my favorite slide. So the benefits are something that you can ask about in tandem with your salary. And if they say that they can't budge on salary, maybe the budget is just really tight right now, whatever the case might be, if they push back, that's okay. You can always pivot to benefits. And these are some of the benefits that I personally would recommend asking about. Already touched on the remote hybrid work option. Many places, they already offer that up front, but you can always ask about if there's the opportunity to work remotely, work from home a certain number of days a week. Most employers, they already pay for life, health and disability insurance for their employees. So if that isn't mentioned in your offer letter that you have, you should definitely ask about that. Or you can, if it is offered and you have questions, or you want to see if there's ways for you to get a higher quality version of your insurance, because usually there will be different tiers or different like levels to the insurance that you can get. You should definitely ask about that and make sure that it's very clear. I know when I first got my first full-time job, I didn't know, like, all of this went over my head, so I would really ask about it just to be clear first and foremost what you're even getting. And then from there, you can see if there's room for maybe a way to have a discounted version of that or something if they can't offer you some of these other benefits here. Especially for fresh college grads, I think professional development is really valuable. Of course, it's valuable for anyone and everyone at all stages, but if you are coming out of Temple and you're thinking about getting a graduate degree, maybe a master's in whatever field, a lot of companies will pay for either part of or maybe even the whole thing through a process called tuition remission. So if you work in higher ed, I know for a fact that they will pay for your degree. Like if you work at a place like Temple, Drexel, Penn, and so on. So something to think about there. Also, a lot of companies, they'll give you the opportunity to receive certifications that are worth thousands of dollars, attend conferences, networking events, things like that, all of which they're not actually money in your pocket, but are worth a lot of money in and of themselves. So you kind of want to think about these benefits in that way, where it's not like you're actually receiving $8,000, but it's $8,000 worth of conferences, for example. Um, so that's really, really valuable, helps you with your resume and helps you just make the most out of this opportunity that you have. And then down here, some other more standard things like retirement investment plans, making sure you understand those, maybe seeing if there is a match, because a lot of employers, they'll match your contribution to your investment plan. So it's basically free money that they're giving you to put away into retirement. And then other forms of leave, sick leave, personal leave, vacation as well. One other thing that's not on here, but I wanted to sort of highlight too, is things like relocation costs. If you have to move to another city for this job, asking if they can give you a stipend for relocation and moving expenses. Things like parking or transportation. Maybe they'll offer you a SEPTA pass or something. So all kinds of things, just don't be afraid to think outside the box and ask. If they say no, at least you tried, right? The worst thing that can happen is that they say no. So uh, yeah, I think that's all I have for benefits. Any thoughts, questions?
No, I think you covered everything. It's a pretty comprehensive list, and I think it would be good for students just if you are going into, interview and then you've moved on to that next phase, like maybe just copy this down and have it with you because you may not think of it on the fly when you're having these conversations. So it may be good just to have this somewhere so that when you are at this stage, like a little checklist of things to go through.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great idea because when you're doing this and you're prepping, you definitely want to have a list. There's no worse feeling than, and I trust me because I've done this, where
Mm.
you think you've prepared and then you talk to the HR person and then afterwards you're like, damn, I forgot to ask about this. And it's kind of awkward at that point to be like, hey, sorry. So just make sure you're prepared and have all of that ready. Cool. So next up, knowing your strategy. These are just some basic kind of big level tips, high level tips that I think everyone should try to keep in mind when entering this conversation. Already said this, bring your notes, remain positive and flexible, which kind of leads to this next point about how it's not really like a battle or a confrontation. If anything, it's the opposite, because both of you want the same thing. Or hopefully you do, in an ideal situation, which is you both want you as a new employee to be happy and excited by this opportunity, right? And the employer, they do want to see that because they want you to be a high contributor, a happy member of their team. So try not to think of it as like, I want these things and this person is getting in the way of that, or I have to like convince this person to give me these things. It's more like these are the things that I want, and the employer probably wants me to have those things too. So let's see how we can work together to come to a solution that works for both of us, both parties. So keeping that framing in mind is super helpful, I think, and can also help relieve some of those nerves of like, oh, I have to impress this person, or I have to like I don't know, try to find my way around. I have to manipulate them, right? That's not at all what's happening here. Um, Another thing too, just don't get personal. So I've heard sometimes people will feel a little bit of pressure and they might say like, oh, I have all these student loans I have to pay, which is why I need $55,000, or I have like family to take care of and so on. And while that might be a really powerful motivator for you to be doing this job and talking to them about this, you don't want to bring those reasons into the negotiation because it's just frankly not relevant. You want to keep it to those two things we talked about already, which is the fair market rate, the research, the bell curve that you've done, and then also your skills and accomplishments and what justifies you earning more basically along that curve. So anything beyond those two, I don't think is, it's just something you can leave out of this. You want to try to anticipate your employer's reactions and responses. So remembering it's okay if they try to bring you down. It's normal for them to try to maybe not push back, but to just sort of bring their side of things and share their perspective. So so don't take it as like a hard no, you know, but also sort of knowing when to back off. It's a little bit of a delicate dance that can, you know, be learned over time and as you practice. And this last point, again, I know we've said this already, but just remembering that they picked you, they want to make it work. So don't be scared and just try your best to keep it grounded in the facts. As long as you keep it grounded in the facts, then it's very, very hard for this to go badly. If anything, it's impossible. So just keeping that in mind. All right, here we have some questions that you might be asked. I mean, I hope you aren't asked these questions because frankly, I don't think it's really any of their business, you know, in terms of, especially this top one, can you please tell me your salary history? That's really not anything that your employer should be knowing or should be factoring into their compensation package for you. So if you are offered these questions, I would just try to deflect, try your best to hold off until after you have the offer in hand, or just sort of politely decline. And a way that I might say that is, you know, while I am really excited about this role and I look forward to the opportunity to work with you all, I personally consider that my salary or my salary with you all would be based on a fair market rate and based on my prior achievements and accomplishments. So I would love those to be the bases of this conversation. So just something to sort of not answer the question, but like delicately move it along. You don't have to be like, no, like you can't ask me that, unless you want to take it that way. But just giving you some ideas as to like how you can potentially approach this.
And is this something like, are you talking about during the interview process or even after they've interviewed you and they're actually offering you the position? Like, when would that come up?
Mm, great question. This would be during the interview process. So before you are offered the role. If you're offered the role and then they ask you maybe one of these questions, like what are your salary expectations? In some ways, that's kind of nice because then they're opening the door to the negotiation for you. Um, but this salary history question, I don't think should be talked about at any point. All right, and then this is just to give another big picture look at how this whole thing is really not just like a one and done, but rather is something that is going on continuously. So if you accept the offer, you're going to be probably going through something similar if you want to continue to grow at that organization and try to negotiate for your next raise or your next promotion. So whether you stay or you seek a new job and then you apply an interview, it's kind of always coming back to this on some level. So that's why you want to view this as not just like something that you have to get out of the way and you do once, but rather it's a skill that you're going to come back to again and again and again. So always keeping it fresh and always being comfortable sort of stating why you deserve the things that you are asking for, essentially. Um, that is, I think, pretty much the core of it. Really, this last slide about practice is just what we said before, you know, practice with a roommate, practice with us at the Salzburg Center. We're always happy to talk with students and do a little bit of a mock negotiation scenario so that you feel a lot more comfortable and prepared when it comes to this. You can practice by yourself in front of a mirror or do a little recording so you can see how things look and how your delivery is going. But just in whatever way you can, making sure that by the time you call back the HR person, you are ready, you're on point, you're prepared, and it's going to go great. So that's pretty much all that I have as far as this. Again, just the 4 steps to show them one more time. And then this is the sample negotiation that I mentioned before, where you can kind of get a sense of what this might look like. So the employee, Olivia, she is here in this dark blue purple color, and then Maya is the employer in pink. So basically, Olivia is initiating this conversation. She's excited to talk about the offer and review the details. And then Maya sort of says, given um, you being an excellent candidate and your fit, we would hope you will accept our offer of 58,000 a year plus benefit. And then Olivia says, thank you, I'm confident I will bring value. However, according to my research, the market rate in the area for someone in this position with my demonstrated skill set is 60 to 68,000 a year. Would you consider an offer within that range? So that's something that you can do, giving that range, it can provide a bit of that flexibility. But remember, going back to what we said before, if Olivia is giving this range, ideally 60 is her goal or like her baseline, right? Or maybe in the lower end of that range. 68 would not be her goal because she knows that Maya is going to try to bring her a little bit down, try to meet in the middle. So then Maya says, going above 58 is close to the max I can offer for this position, but we've anticipated the employer's responses. We're not going to just take that as a no because it's not a no, frankly. It's kind of a little bit of a wishy-washy answer. So then Olivia advocates for herself and says, I appreciate that. However, given my experience, reducing expenses and increasing revenue by 15% in my current position, replace that with whatever it is that you've done in the past. I hope we can work together to come to a salary that reflects my qualifications. Very professional. I kind of like this language. It's very just like calm, cool, and collected. And then Maya kind of takes it and goes from there. The best I can offer you is 62, and then they go on to discuss benefits. So there isn't any more in this, but just to sort of give an example, every situation is different, but some of this language might be helpful just as a template. And then I have some closing tips, which are just reiterating some of these points again, but just want to end on this note of, even if you can't get them to move, that's okay, right? That is, if anything, that is something that you should really, really be proud of, because you don't want to have that feeling like I did, maybe we did, where you sort of think back on it and you regret not asking, and then you sort of feel like, wow, I should have just done that, because even if they said no, at least I would know for a fact, and then I would be able to have that peace of mind. Basically, you're giving yourself peace of mind by doing this. I'll just put it that way. So yeah, that's all I got. Are there any other? Do you have any other questions or anything to add?
I mean, that was very thorough. We could have done a role play. You could have told me I could have been Maya for you. But
Okay.
no, I think everything you said was great. And I would just reiterate to students to reach out to you if they do have questions, or definitely sign up for like a mock salary negotiation interview with your office, because um, again, it's just something that we're not used to doing. And if you're not used to doing it, it may seem like, well, that's not a big deal, I'm not gonna worry about it, but you don't want to get into that, like, and now you're flustered, you don't know what to say, you're running, and you do walk away feeling like, I could have done so much more. I wish I would have said it this way. Or the words, as soon as you walk out the door, you think of 10,000 other things you would have said. But practicing, going through it, and actually modeling, having that conversation, I think will go a long way. And also just remember that if you get nervous in the interview, a lot of things leave your mind. So just
Mhm.
having that practice will help you, so that you're more steady when you actually go in for that phase of the interview process.
Mhm. Yep, I could not agree more. And it's tough, it's awkward. Like the first time you try to read it, or at least the first time I tried to read it, maybe I'll speak for myself. I was like, what? Like I'm not used to this. Like I have to sort of like come up with a way to make it sound natural to me, right? But that comes with time, as all of these things do. So you can do it. That's the final message.
You can do it. Okay, well, Stacy, thank you so much. We really do appreciate all of this valuable information, and I really do hope that students take it to heart, and will reach out and schedule appointments to practice this. Thank you. That's all I can say. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Okay. I stopped the recording. Very good. Very good. That was exciting.
Thank
How'd you
you.
feel?